Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this 2 months Beyond Adventure talk with Stephen Fabes. I'm really looking forward to this. I mentioned in the book, in the letter that came out with the book, one of my favorite things about this book is this page when it opens with a map of the world. And I mean, for me, any book that starts with a map is a good book. But weirdly, it was the first time that I looked at a map of the world and thought, that looks kind of doable, you know. And I've read lots of adventure books, lots of different things, and it's never felt something that was encompassable in a way that Stephen's book made me feel. So there's clearly something rather special about it. So it's great to have Stephen join us to share his tales from the world, as it were. So for those of you not joined before, the way it works is I'm going to have a chat with Stephen. I've got a vague structure of some questions, but really what we talk about is up to you guys. So if you've got a question you want to ask, feel free to pop it in the chat and I'll ask it. Or if you want to ask a question as we're going along, just pop your hand up. There's a little, where is it? Somewhere down the bottom there. Probably near it. No, I don't know. Where's? Anyway, you can probably work out how to wave your hand or say, I'd like to ask a question in the chat, Tim. And then I'll bring you in and you can ask it in person. Because there's no point me doing all the talking. That's why we do it this way. So, Stephen, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Oh no, it's our pleasure. So you were saying beforehand that that you're working tonight in the emergency room.
Yeah, they're kind of short-staffed tonight, and so I got a call quite late on to ask to come in because I think it's the football tonight, isn't it? So I think London's going to be a bit crazy, and yeah, so 10 hours after this, but it should be all right.
Wow. So what's a night shift then? How long does that last?
It's 10 hours. I start at 10 o'clock and finish at 8 o'clock.
Wow.
I haven't done one for years actually, because I work part-time now because I'm working on a second book, and so I locum when I pick my shifts. I do late shifts, but I don't usually do night shifts, so this will be a first for me. So
you've had your arm twisted for tonight?
Yeah, a little bit, but you know, it's all right.
So are you praying for an England win or an England loss? Which is going to be better or worse for the emergency room scenes?
Good question. I don't know actually. We'll find out, I suppose.
It could be a whole lot worse.
Yeah.
It could have been blazing sunshine all day. Then you'd have all sorts of problems. I think the fact that you work as a doctor is one of the really special things about the book. Really, I think it really gave you a distinct insight into the human condition. And I think it was you summed it up with that phrase about all you need to do is I've forgotten it already. Go on. What's the phrase? What do you need to do?
Well,
you've forgotten it as well, haven't you?
They say that being a doctor boils down to just 4 things: shut up, listen, know something, or care. I can't remember where I heard that. I think, but maybe from a colleague. But that's always rung true for me. And it felt like when I was traveling, it was a sort of there was a similar sense that those things were important as well.
And was any one more important than another? Was it more important to listen, to shut up? Did you need to care?
I think the more that I was as I was traveling, I was visiting different remote medical projects, and I think as the journey progressed and I visited more and more, I became as a way to kind of sate my own curiosity, I suppose. That I guess that trying to learn about some of the social context of health and disease, I think inevitably that makes you care a bit more, because you sort of uncovering things that you didn't know before, and you're trying to figure things out a little bit, and I was speaking a lot of the time to doctors and patients and hearing people's stories.
And I think the stories are what bring the book to life. But let's talk about your early days, Stephen. So I mean, it's not every teenager who sets out to cycle across across Chile. That, did you have a fairly adventurous upbringing? With your parents adventurous?
I mean, I probably spent quite a bit of time outside, I guess. Yeah, but when I was 19, my brother was 17. We both went to South America to cycle the length of Chile, which took us 5 months, which is something I write a bit about in the book at the beginning. And it was one of those adventures you have at that age. It was a complete disaster in lots of ways because we were just unprepared for it, really. We couldn't fix bicycles. We had fights with each other. We ran out of money, all these kind of things. But it was also, on top of that, was a great adventure as well. So that sowed the seed, really. The experience of being outside, of feeling vulnerable, I guess, in these big wide open spaces, and knowing if things fall apart, then you've got to try and get yourself out of that situation. That was for me was really thrilling. And I mean,
it's quite a leap to be doing that at 19.
It was.
Did you do the scouting thing? What? Because
yeah, I guess I was a scout,
and I didn't. I was a scout. I'm hugely jealous, and that's, in essence, that's where this whole business came from. Is me thinking I never lived that life packed into panniers that I wanted to live, so I'll live it vicariously through others. But something wasn't holding you back. You got. How did it? It's an amazing thing to do at 19 and 17. Yeah,
it was a huge trip, and I think I often reflect on that and think that some of those decisions you make when you're that age really can change the whole trajectory of your life. It's quite interesting. I didn't, because that ultimately went on to lead to a much bigger journey and lots of other sort of things, I guess. But yeah, I still don't know. I can't remember where the idea to cycle across Chile came from. But I just remember yearning for a real adventure at that age, and not wanting to do kind of the more standard, like, sort of gap year-y stuff. And I wanted to plan my own trip. There was a yeah. So it all sort of came together, and then loved it, and failed a lot, and then came home, and I remember that a moment of being in the Atacama Desert in the north of Chile, kind of looking north and wondering, well, I could keep going. I could get to Colombia, I could get to North America, up to Alaska if I wanted to, and so that sort of that sowed the seed, definitely.
And yet you still went back, and you ended up in medicine, which seems quite a conventional career for someone who's clearly quite out there, because you weren't just cycling across Chile, you were hitchhiking around the UK. You had a bit of a spell as a DJ as well.
With the punning clan, yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I think I was drawn to medicine quite early on, and even after I'd left on my trip, I was never in any doubt that this is what I would be doing for the rest of my life. So I still really enjoy my job, but it is difficult to balance that with other things. And yeah, that's, I suppose, part of the reason why I'm working part-time at the moment. But it does kind of fit in with different things, sort of medical journalism and other things that you can do, and it definitely, using, as you said sort of towards the beginning, I think using that medical lens to learn a bit about the places that I was traveling through was huge, because I think as a cyclist, the way that I was traveling, I wasn't anywhere for very long, and I often wasn't really getting under the skin of things initially because of the way I traveled. I was a fleeting visitor. I didn't have the language. I didn't have the time to get to the heart of things. And so when I started visiting medical projects, that opened things up. Yeah, and I think that's one, looking back, I think that's one of the things that I'm sort of very happy and satisfied with, is that using medicine was able to then shine a light on other bigger issues, and I was able to learn a bit more about the places I was traveling through, I guess.
And I got a sense within the book that that sometimes there was a bit of a tension when you turned up in a place and it was sort of almost backpacker central, and it sort of threw a bit of a light on the fact that lots of people are very transient visitors, and already by choosing to cycle there, you sort of wanted to get more under the skin. So there was that tension there already, and then that idea of using medicine as a way to really get under the skin of a place and its people. I think it made it really distinctive. But did you feel that tension with the backpackers and the tourists and the regular travelers?
Only in the sense that everyone kind of wants to be a traveller and less so a tourist, I guess. And then you kind of, on a bicycle, you've got that privileged perspective in that you can get into quite wild places in not much time, and you can spend quite a long time in quite remote places, and you've got this independence, and then you can sort of rejoin everyone else in this sort of big backpacking hub, and it can feel like you're sort of being hurled between different worlds. I suppose it's a bit weird, but yeah, I don't know if I felt it so much as tension, but it was sometimes a bit jarring, I guess, to be so like suddenly in a bar having a pint of Guinness with Tom from Leeds. And it's just the fact the world is, travel has sort of shrunken the world, I suppose.
Yeah, very much so. So let's just go back to you when you were doing your medical training, because I think for lots of us who aren't part of that world, it's quite difficult to know what it's like when you're starting your training as a doctor. But it strikes me as very long, very intense, and quite, you need to learn that stuff, can't you? There's no sort of coasting your way through or making it up on the spur of the moment. How does it feel to be looking into a career as a doctor and going through that process?
I felt it. I thought about it I felt a bit divided, I suppose. I was excited about when I was a junior doctor, getting more responsibility, climbing the ladder. As I said, always really loved my job, and I felt very lucky to have a job that I loved. But then there was another sort of mischievous part of me that just wanted to blow up my life and go on a bit of an adventure, and that was when I got lost in memories of being cycling through South America, and I knew that I'd be in the end up working in the NHS till I was, whatever, old. And so I decided that even if I was out of my career for 5 or 6 years, that's really just a drop in the ocean. So I felt that I could do it. It was a hard decision at the beginning, I think. There was a lot of soul searching. It's not something that people often do in medicine. The training is fairly intense. You're in medical school for a long time. You've got student tuition fees to pay off and everything, and people don't just blow up their lives, as I say. But so at the beginning it was difficult, but I didn't regret it once I'd left.
And was there an incident or a trigger? Was there something when you were like, actually, I've got to do it, and I need to do it now?
Not really, just a sort of vague yearning to sort of do something else for a bit, and as I said, like daydreaming about adventures and things like that, and I think just that sense of getting older and feeling that time is speeding up, and wanting to sort of make use of it. I guess I'm not very good at explaining why it had to be
no. I think there's almost two different schools, aren't there? There's the people who like yourself have just got this sense that there's something else out there. I mean, you even refer to the German phrase, which I'm going to horribly mispronounce, is Sehnsucht or whatever, of that wanderlust, that sort of pulling you out there because you're looking for something more.
Yeah.
That just gently needles away and pervades. And then there's other people who have that sort of sudden revelation, and I didn't get the sense of there being a sudden revelation. I think it's a little like people need to hear from both sides of it, because mainly we hear that, oh, and you know, this mega event happened and I just knew I had to do it, and mega events don't come along in everyone's lives, and sometimes there's a pull that's pulling them somewhere that they need to respond to without that big trigger, and you clearly were able to do that.
Yeah, it wasn't anything I really was running away from. As I said, I had friends in London. I had a job I enjoyed, so it was more. It more felt that I was being pulled towards something else, and then there was obviously a bit of sort of inner conflict about and guilt, I suppose, about leaving a job that I was enjoying, and so it's difficult.
So come on then. So you've given into the pining and the pull, and you've kind of gone, right, I'm going to travel around the world. And how do you go about planning that then? Because there's a funny bit in the book where you say you'd sketched the line and it went through Antarctica, and you said, okay, maybe not 7 continents, 6 then. But,
yeah, so it started when I'd finished work at St Thomas's. I went to the pub, as we often did, so I was with some friends, with some junior doctors, and had a little Times Mini Atlas with me, and I drew a line that sort of went all the way across 6 continents and around the world, and announced to these friends that I was going to cycle around the world. And I said, I think I kind of explained that not only would this be a great adventure, but it'd probably be quite easy as well, because I've been on bike rides before. So I just had to sort of cycle for as far as I could each day on repeat, and I'd get there. That's how it began. And then I just, for the next couple of years, I was planning it in my spare time. And I was working quite long hours and doing postgraduate exams. But all my free time, I was trying to plan this journey. And so I was trying to save money as well. So I was living in this rubbish NHS-owned like cupboard of a flat next to Guy's Hospital, saving money, and then just doing a lot of the kind of useless stuff, really, in hindsight. So I was trying to get sponsors where probably I should have just saved more money and not bothered doing that. I was like obsessively researching equipment, and most of that was posted home within the first sort of 6 months. So there was a lot of stuff looking back on it that wasn't very helpful. I purposefully didn't plan the route in much detail, and that turned out to be a good idea, because I was basically I thought I'll go from London, I'll try and get to Istanbul, I'll figure it out on the way, and then I get to Istanbul, I've got to get to Cairo, and I sort of did it like that. And that was a good move, I think. And then I was able to have that flexibility to sort of change my mind and go off on a different direction, and I'd meet other bikers and get advice about which way to go. So yeah, the planning was, there's a lot of stuff that I probably didn't need to do, but I mean, that's part of getting ready for any big trip, isn't it? It's that sort of sense of excitement you've got, to like poring over maps and
absolutely,
and reading other people's stories and blogs and like all that stuff.
So you said there was lots of useless stuff that you did. What was the best thing that you did to prepare yourself for going?
I can't think of anything particularly useful. I think that the most important thing was just committing to the trip.
Yeah.
And then I spent a lot of time trying to get the right bicycle. I did a bicycle skills course. That was quite good, because I'm a rubbish mechanic. I still am a rubbish mechanic, but it made me like a marginally less rubbish mechanic. And it was there were various skills there that helped a bit. What else? I didn't do any physical preparation. Did no training at all.
Yeah, we read that in the book. That was quite funny, really.
Yeah, it made it hard at the beginning, and but you do get fit on the road. You don't necessarily need to be in peak physical condition when you leave. And just sort of cycling is. I wasn't racing, so yeah.
You had a few years, and whose tales of adventure did you read then? You referenced a few. Were there any that you really used as a bit of a Bible, or did you go down that route of saying, actually, I want this to be a pure experience and I don't want it to be clouded by others?
Any books by cycle tourers, really, I was reading. Yeah, so from Dervla Murphy, onwards, really. So anything about cycle touring I would read, and then some sort of yeah, Eric Newby and like and Colin Thubron and Jonathan Rayban, yeah, a lot of those travel writers. I was more interested, and I write a little bit about this in the early part of the book, about being more interested in the travel writers rather than the sort of adventurers who seemed to me to be kind of more introspective, and I was more interested in sort of turning the lens outwards. And I think that the travel writers did that better, and they were seemed more interested in the world around them, a little bit less self-obsessed perhaps, and it wasn't about winning or conquering or anything like that. It was about just trying to learn a bit more about the world, and those kind of writers. I was much more interested in reading those books, I think.
They're the books that we tend to read in the subscription as well. In fact, one of my old emails used to start out with the line "No conquering hero myths," because I think that's the thing about adventure is for such a long time it was all about usually a bloke, occasionally one, mainly a bloke, overcoming some natural obstacle to demonstrate how their prowess. And really, once you've read one of those books, there's probably not that many more to read. So no, I completely get the travel writing, and again, it goes back to that thing about observing the human condition, doesn't it? So I think it speaks to what you were doing. I'm a big fan of maps and cartography, and you've got a lovely quote in there. You say, "Maps are dangerous to plans and a siren call to adventure," which I love that. So, and you mentioned before about not really having much of a plan and sort of making it up as you went along. Were you tending to look for anything? What tended to go? Oh, I'm gonna go in that direction. How did you make those decisions? Because there were quite a lot of points where you could have gone lots of different ways, but there was clearly something driving you onwards.
So I would
getting back in time for your visa, of course.
Yeah, so there was the visa things, but they came a bit later, really, in Asia, where I was racing to get out of countries before before the visa ran out. What I would try to do is kind of go off on a bit of a mini adventure. I would pick the unpaved, hilly roads, sometimes for no particular reason. I would just want to be on a road that was out of the way, and that route would often take me a bit longer. But I never regretted making those decisions, really. That was always where I had looking back on the journey now, I can kind of remember those moments far more vividly. And then I would join the sort of main thrust of the journey, I guess, and I tried to make up some time, hopefully not on crazy roads, but sometimes roads that were a little bit busier than I'd be comfortable with, but they were faster. And then I'd try and find another little mini adventure and go off and do it again. So that was kind of how I did it. I spent too long in some places doing that. I was in South America. I was across the Andes 10 times, sort of winding my way up, and then realized that I was going to get very, very cold in Alaska if I didn't get cracking. So I sort of speeded up after that. The decisions I made, yeah, sometimes they were just because a place has a silly name. I wanted to, and I think that was, having that sort of freedom to make those decisions, to just go off to random places, is something I enjoyed. Obviously, if somewhere was very, very famously very beautiful, I would try to incorporate that into my route, and I would get advice from other bikers as well about the roads ahead. And I met loads of bikers on the roads, hundreds over the course of the journey, and we would swap tips and things like that. And they were a real great source of information. So yeah, so basically not being put off by hills and gravel, because they were the best places to cycle most of the time.
And I definitely got a strong sense of your liking for the hills. I think I first thought of it about those Andean passes, and you did seem to zigzag backwards and forward through them. Is that not difficult when you've got quite a loaded bike?
Yeah, I was now, I think so. Now there's been a sort of craze of bike packing, and that wasn't really a thing when I left. And it exploded in subsequent years. But it's I was basically bike packing but fully loaded, because I was taking these bike packing routes, but I had a 20-kilogram bike and 40 kilograms of stuff on it. So, but you can do that. It's just going to take you a lot longer, and also the bike suffers more. So I had more sort of repair jobs to do, and it was slow and hard sometimes. But as I said, I wasn't in a rush. The trip took more than 6 years in the end. So maybe I would go for a slightly lighter bike next time. So I could make slightly faster progress. But yeah.
And was there a repair job that you were particularly proud of? Was there one like, might not have that good bike maintenance skills, but I've nailed that one with a bent fork?
I nailed virtually nothing. I'm just not very practical. I'm not very and I'm not particularly interested in bikes, I'll be honest. I love cycling, and I love them as a mode, as a means to see the world, but as machines themselves, that I'm not particularly, I don't sort of tinker endlessly to try and get everything set up right, and I probably didn't maintain my bike very well. So I've probably only got myself to blame, I guess.
I don't know about that. I think stuffing your underpants into your tyres to keep them inflated.
Yeah. That worked quite well.
Yeah. That's a man with a talent for problem solving. So obviously you cycled in pretty much every biome that there is. Which was your favourite then? Did you enjoy the deserts? Did you enjoy the tundra? What was the best bit for cycling in then?
I'm a sucker for the mountains, I think. So especially the Andes, just great for cycle touring. You've got so many routes, and you've got so many little of these passes that you can get across from Chile to Argentina and back again. Lots of roads. No, you're not really stressing about visas, and it was just amazingly beautiful. So that was the mountains, I think, and I think there's the sense of the physical exertion. I mean, that just sort of heightens the senses, doesn't it? Once you get and you do pay the price for that as well, and altitude sickness and stuff, and gets quite cold. But I still think the mountains for me. The deserts as well, some of them were quite beautiful, some of them were a bit boring, depending. Namib was very beautiful. Mongolia's got some amazing landscapes. But I still think the mountains, yeah.
And which is the bit that you hated? That you were like, if I ever meet anyone who's coming in this direction, I'm going to stop them in their tracks and turn them around and send them back?
I mean, the place that was quite difficult, I mean, it was also great to do it. I don't regret any of those roads, but in Patagonia, right in the far south, before you get to the Andes, it can be fairly bleak and very windy, and you've got this like torrential winds, which always seems to be against you. And it's, gale force wind is just business as usual. It's like, it's really, that's what you get day after day, and it made things really hard going, and the roads were a bit rubbish as well. So I think that was a test of sort of, you spend a lot of time in your head trying to entertain yourself and things, and that lasted weeks, really, or it seemed to last weeks, until I got into the Andes. But yeah, the far south of South America is tough. Yeah.
I think our friend von Schuenard has with his fancy logo has tricked everyone into the wrong impression of Patagonia, hasn't it? You've always got this image of the jagged skyline, and it's you're certainly not the first person who said that. I think I seem to recall Anna McNuff said pretty much the same thing. From her journey, and I love the character, the cycling characters that you met. There's certainly a tribe of sort of long distance cyclists that seem even more bonkers than yourself, and even more out there. Who was your favourite fellow cyclist?
Well, I cycle with lots of different people. I cycle with my friend Naomi for about a year in Africa, so that was fantastic to have a friend and be together for that long.
She did sound bonkers, it has to be said.
Yeah, she's great, and she was great company, and had that sort of attitude of like just very curious and very sort of happy-go-lucky and very determined and very just up for everything. So she made a really good travel companion, and she was just fascinated by people as well, which is always good when you're traveling with someone. I traveled with my friend Ollie for a month in Georgia. He features in the book. I had a girlfriend for a time, Claire. I cycled with her through Indonesia and Australia. And then you meet these people on the roads. They're kind of coming towards you. They look like a sort of a pack mule or something, because they've got like, they've got this sort of tapered silhouette, and like as you get closer you realize that it's a cycle tourist, and you'd find them meet people in these really out of the way places, and sometimes if they go in the same direction, then you'd kind of join forces and cycle with each other for a few days. And it did feel like a tribe. Yeah, you kind of you have so much in common, and you're both sort of having to deal with the stress of getting through borders and getting to places in time for visas, and you're always exposed to the weather, and you're wild camping, and you're getting chased by dogs, and you're getting hassled by officials. So you kind of got all these things in common already. The most fascinating of all the traveling cyclists was a guy called Heinz Stucker, who he appears in the end of my book, and I was actually fortunate enough that I've dedicated a bit of quite a few words to Heinz, because he's an interesting character, and I was able to do a bit of a character sketch because he was the most traveled man in the world in the 90s, and he's cycled the equivalent of 16 times around the globe. He's cycled to every country on earth, and has incredible stories, but we didn't always agree. We fell out. We had a few differences of opinion, especially around politics. So we had quite impassioned late night discussions about things. But he was one of the more interesting characters. I won't give too much away, but yeah.
I did think he was. I think he was fair. And with one person or another, or even on your own, you did seem to go to a lot of places that sounded like a lot of fun. Portland sounded fun. Uber sounded quite fun. Where was the bit that you had the most fun? Because as a former DJ, I get the sense there's a hedonist lurking within there.
Probably is, yeah. I think the US was a lot of fun. Yeah, the US was a lot of fun. I was on the West Coast, so yeah, so that was, so it was a lot easier than it had been for the last 2 years before that, where I was in Africa and South America. So yeah, and especially places like Portland, where there was the world's largest naked bike ride that I found myself in at one point, which turned into a big sort of naked party afterwards. But there was a bit of that. Yeah, the US probably, I would say. Yeah.
Fab. Well, there we are. We don't need to go cycling over Andean mountain passes to enjoy a bit of your experience. I think it's one of those wonderful sort of serendipitous ways that travel unfolds is what you recounted about that, what you call the first day effect. And you were saying about how often you'd be in a country and the thing that happened on the first day was often your favorite bit. Did you get to the point where you'd kind of go into a new country and go, I wonder what's going to happen now? Or was that something that sort of you realize in hindsight?
Yeah, the first day effect is this kind of thing where I felt that people would often offer me hospitality the first, or I'd find myself having some sort of good fortune the first day that I was in a country. But I don't know whether that's just a trick of the memory, really, whether you're more inclined to remember those things or not. And maybe you're just a bit more sort of sensitive to everything when you're in a new place for the first time. So yeah, but I got hospitality all over the place. I mean, that's one of the things I think about traveling by bicycle. You're moving slowly. You're very obvious, and people are very curious about where you're going, what you're doing, and will come and approach you. Well, you are very approachable as a cyclist as well, and people get bikes, people use bikes all over the world, and so that's when you get into little conversations with people, and that's when you get people going, well, you know, where are you staying? It's getting late, come and stay in my home, or whatever. So that would happen all the way around the world, in almost every country that I cycled through, really. It did seem to happen more the first time I was in somewhere, but it does happen all over the place,
including in England. On your second night, you were invited into someone's home.
Yeah, that was it. It was a couple, Tommy and Roger, in Sittingbourne. I'd left in the middle of the coldest European winter for 31 years, and I'd been kind of cycling through thick snow, wondering what I was getting into. I was unfit, I was overloaded. Kids were throwing snowballs at me, and then and this lady just invited me off, you know. And how often does that happen in miserable Britain? It doesn't really, but I think must be something about the bicycle, and maybe someone looking like they're having a bit of trouble. And she invited me in and gave me somewhere to sleep for the night, and then I was off on my way the next morning. So I knocked on their door 6 and a bit years later, as I was coming back through Sittingbourne in Kent. And they baked me a cake, so it was I really wanted to kind of complete the circle. It was really nice to see them again, and it's one of my sort of more special memories, I guess, because that was the first episode or incident of incredible hospitality, and it got repeated around the world, but just didn't expect it at home, I think.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, in that we travel the world looking for these experiences, and yet it's the ones that occur on our doorstep that we're most surprised about. It's that strange condition. Folks, I seem to be doing all the questions. That's absolutely fine with me. But if anyone has got any questions for Stephen, do chip in as we go. We're going to talk a bit more about the journey, and then we'll talk about Stephen's medical training and the work he's doing yet. But do feel free to chip in. I think from talking to other folk who've done similar journeys, it's that vulnerability that generates that hospitality. But it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Vulnerability, especially when you're out there on your own. There must have been times when you really felt vulnerable and worried about it. Are there any particularly memorable ones?
I cycled through Afghanistan, so I remember being pretty on edge going through there. The probably the most memorable experience that came in South America, when I was cycling through quite a remote part of Peru, when I found this, what I thought was a derelict little hut, and sort of completely aloof, no village I could see anywhere near it. And I put my tent was falling apart at this point, so I noticed the hut had a roof that jutted out, so I put my tent next to this hut to get a bit of cover from the rain, and then I went to sleep. And then I woke up in the early hours to what sounded like footsteps outside my tent, and I kind of opened the tent, looked around, I couldn't see anyone, and then somebody started wandering towards me, and then this sort of grubby face appeared in my tent porch, and he said "Afuera," which is like "get out," and it happened very quickly because I realized that he was holding a gun, and I soon marched out of my tent at gunpoint and then into his home. And it was a very nerve-wracking situation that ended well, actually, because he sort of quickly calmed down. I spoke not much Spanish really, but enough to sort of try to explain myself. And at that point, I was definitely a tourist and trying to explain that I was just traveling through the country, etc. And that it was raining, and he offered me some soup, and then we sat down around his kitchen table eating soup together. And he'd been mining gold illegally at night, which is why he was out late at night, and he'd been robbed fairly recently as well by men with guns, so which is why he had a gun with him. But of course I didn't know any of that, so it was frightening. It was, and I just glad, yeah, you can overreact, I think, in those situations, and you can't, once you're aggressive or you overreact, there's often no going back from that. And I did hear stories of other travelers where things had gone really badly wrong, and I think that, you know, I mean, that situation may not have gone well, but I think that it's much more likely to go badly if you just got to be as diplomatic as you can, and don't react too soon, really. And yeah, luckily it turned out all right, and then he brought me tomato soup to my tent the next morning.
Tomato soup breakfast. And you said he showed you some of the nuggets that he'd found as well.
Yeah.
How big's a nugget then? What sort of size?
They were pretty small. Yeah, pretty small. But it made everything made sense once I realized that he'd been mining, because it was illegal to mine in that area. So that's why the men do it at night time. And that's why he was covered in mud. So yeah, everything sort of fell into place when he explained that.
So that would be high on the tips for finding a camp spot. Would be don't pitch outside a gun-toting gentleman's house who's going to wake you up in the middle of the night. What were your best tips? Where did you always want to find a camp?
I loved rough camping. It was really part of so important to the journey. It was very much bound up with cycle touring. It heightened the sense of adventure. It was obviously free, and I had a lot of freedom by virtue of the fact that I could stick my tent up by the side of the road. And I spent more than 1,000 nights just by roadsides, really. My rule was to try and see it as hide and seek against the world. And the reason for that is that I think if someone discovers you camping, most likely that's not going to be an issue. Most likely that person's not going to have any malicious intent. But in a lot of these sleepy villages around the world, you're news, right? So that person will go back to a village, and then suddenly 10, 20 people will know. And people are curious, really, and they'll just want to come and see. They just want to know what you're doing, what you're up to. And it wasn't in places like Ethiopia, you'd wake up and at some point in the night, someone had found your tent and unzipped it, and you just wake up with 15 children just watching you sleep. So that could be quite stressful. So I would do everything I could to avoid being spotted. And what you want to be, you either want to hide, or you go to the chief of the village or whoever, especially in Africa, and you'd ask permission, and then you'd be in the center of the village. You'd put your tent next to the chief's house or something, and then you'd be under their protection. But what you don't want to do is kind of ask permission and then kind of sleep on the edge of the village. That's the worst. That's the time where I had problems, really. So lots of people know where you are, but you're not really sort of under anyone's sort of supervision. So that's a bit of an issue. Yeah. So, and I had various ways to do it. I would follow trails off the road. I would camp in unusual places in the middle of roundabouts, sea caves, in the ruins of castles, sometimes in police stations and courthouses and hospitals and schools. So lots of different places. So yeah, if you get stuck, you can always ask people, and they'll usually help. And that's the privilege, I think, of being a sort of Western traveller, really, that people often would just look after you and trust you. Yeah.
Yes, we again, it's another one of those factors of privilege that it's hard for us to see. So when you were setting out to cycle across Chile, you had an encounter with another experienced cycle tourist who kind of gave you the information you needed and scared the pants off your mother, by the sound of it. Have you been able to do that for others? Do you think you're imparting that wisdom?
Yeah, sometimes I give talks at sort of cycle touring events and things like that. So hopefully I can share some of the knowledge. Things have moved on a little bit, I think, in terms of the advice that I can give people, because there's new kit available and different ways of bike packing and stuff. But in terms of routes and stuff, yeah, I tried to share some of the things, the knowledge that I gathered along the way, I guess. Yeah.
So let's talk about the other big thing in the book. And like we said before, it was through your medical training that you kind of found a way to get under the skin of the people and the places you were visiting. And I love there was a little phrase that you had in there about doctors as code breakers, listening for clues, tracing constellations of symptoms. And I get a sense that that's what you were doing while you were traveling as well. But how do you think that medical training helped you along the way?
It changed everything, really. It was, as I said, initially it was just a way to sate my own curiosity, but then it became a way to try to understand the places that I was traveling through in a little bit more detail. I mean, I wouldn't say that I would ever, have a real insight or a very deep insight into places, because again, I was moving quite quickly and I was a cyclist. But what I do, what I understand about healthcare, I could use that knowledge to try and interpret other medical projects, and I was interested particularly in the sort of social determinants of health. So I found this in London, really, working in the NHS. You're meeting patients, you're hearing their stories, and then you're getting a sense of the sort of social and political forces at work in the UK. So I think that's what probably inspired me to visit these medical projects. I thought, if that happens at home, perhaps this would be a way to try and get a slightly deeper understanding anyway of the places that I was traveling through. And that turned out to be the case. So you become interested when you're thinking about what are the social determinants of health. I think the narrative is very much in resource poor settings. We're inclined to believe that poverty is the main sort of thing, and although that's very important, I think you get a much fuller impression when you're visiting these places, because you get to understand that actually there's lots of forces at work, as there are in every place, in London and anywhere else. It's about, you can see the impact of history, of climate change, of conflict, of migration, of all kinds of different of foreign investment. And you can see how those things impact the environment, people's lives, healthcare, and then therefore have an influence on health as well. So yeah, I guess that's why I sort of followed that route of visiting these projects. It was able to try and figure out a bit more than I knew before.
It's fascinating, isn't it, that the ways that we can go beyond that superficial experience of a place. And I think it's such a unique way. And I thought that about lots of the medical references in that. It made me think a lot about the things that doctors know that we don't know, like you were talking to a gentleman and you said he had he spoke quite slowly, and you said you recognized it, and for me it almost shone a light on the way that doctors' brains must work. I mean, you can't be able to turn it off. You must constantly be meeting people and thinking, there's something there. Yeah,
there's a guy who I met who had a condition called acromegaly, which is a brain tumor that produces lots of growth hormone. And I recognized the features, and actually he'd already been diagnosed. I met him fairly early on in the journey. But yeah, I think that's my next book actually is about medical diagnosis in its, but also sort of storytelling. There's various stories in there as well. But it's but yeah, I think so. I think you're always kind of it makes you more observant, I think, about people and situations, because there's in making a diagnosis in medicine, there are clues everywhere, and so you have to be quite alert to that too. And you get all these like postgraduate exams you go through where you have to make diagnoses fairly quickly and based upon small bits of evidence or small observations. So yeah, I guess you take that with you wherever you go. Yeah.
It must be a bit of a blessing and a curse at the same time.
Yeah, I think mostly a blessing. Yeah, I think so.
So when you did the medical training, then when you say you have the test, what is it written out on how does it happen? Are you put into a situation where it's like observe this person and then come up with what's wrong with them, or are you given a sheet of paper that kind of has a whole backstory and you have to pick the bits out? How does it work in the testing?
Do you mean the postgraduate exams?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you often, what would happen is that you'll be sort of introduced to this sort of professional patient who's got various clinical signs, and you'll get a very little instruction. The examiner will go something like, this is Jones, she suffers from shortness of breath, would you please examine her respiratory system or something? And then you have to sort of examine everything, examine her, turn to the examiner, present your findings, give a list of differential diagnosis, and then they'll sort of test you. So it can be quite hard. You're diagnosing things that you've never seen before, but you have to just be you have to be aware of all these different clinical signs and look for them and trust your own observations, I suppose.
Wow. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So, do you think that your travels helped prepare you for a life in medicine, and specifically for medicine at this time when we've been dealing with the pandemic?
I think so. I think one of the things that helped me is actually not the traveling necessarily, although it did. I think it also had a negative impact, I would say, as well. I think I spent a lot of time on my own, and that all that time alone, it can be quite luxurious, but it's quite hard as well. And I found it a little bit difficult coming back to sort of normal life afterwards. So that took a lot of sort of adjustment, I guess. But I think that when I was away, certainly didn't consider myself a writer before I left on the trip. During the course of the journey, read lots and lots of books, and was blogging and then writing for magazines, and then finally I wrote a book when I got home. And I think the becoming a writer has definitely been important to me during the pandemic and just generally, I think, in medicine, because I think if you're writing it, first of all, it helps you reflect on things. It's sometimes emotional experiences that all doctors, nurses, medical professionals often experience. So it helps you reflect on those things. And I think it can be quite cathartic as well to write about those experiences. I think there's this, I think if you're thinking more deeply about situations you've encountered, then you're obviously then more curious and you kind of go and investigate. So being a writer has helped me hugely, and that very much grew out of this journey. So I suppose yes, I would say that's true.
But it's interesting that it's the writing and the reflection and the creative process. Russell asked a question in the chat, which is quite pertinent. He said, with so many years and so much mileage, how did you choose the moments to share in the book then?
Yeah, it's a very difficult process. I had a good editor. I was tasked with writing about a 6-year journey in one book. That was never going to be easy. My initial preference was not to do it in one book. Most of the medical stuff comes in Asia, but actually I realized that I didn't have to give everything equal weighting, and the narrative, the pace of the narrative changes quite dramatically. I think you start off, things are fairly breathless early on. The pace is fairly rapid, and that but that is not sustained for that long, though. It sort of soon slows down. As soon as I get to Asia, there's a lot more. It goes slower, and I'm visiting more medical projects, and so there's those reflections from then on in. So I think the book is 20 chapters or something, 21, and I think probably 14 of them are on Asia. So there is definitely an emphasis there. So that's how you do it, I suppose. You just don't have to give the same amount of words to every place, and picking the moments. Well, I mean, I wanted to write an entertaining travel book, right? Because those are the kind of travel books that I like reading. So if it was an entertaining story, then I might maybe prioritize it. If it had significance because it fitted with the medical theme, then it would go in. And I suppose those were my main two rules. But there was lots of, other cyclists, for example, I had to cut out of the book. There were loads of experiences that I had to cut out. It was more than double the length initially. And it's already, fairly thick. So it was a really hard job. My editor was great. And it was, I think I've got it down to a sort of sensible size now, but that was always going to be a difficult process.
I think it's a fab balance. I mean, it is a it's a chunky old book, but I think it works really well, and it's got a great balance. It's funny how we hear that about great editors quite often. So you wanted to do it in 2 books, but you were persuaded to do it as one. Who was that? Who persuaded you?
The publisher, and it wasn't so much persuasion rather than being forced to. Yeah, but I think that I mean that's reasonable, and I can see the very obvious reasons for doing that. Not just from a marketing perspective as well, but just being able to sort of have that narrative arc and being able to sort of reflect on how you change during the course of the journey. So that all that stuff is important, but it just inevitably means that I did feel a bit uncomfortable at the beginning with the speed that the narrative moves that early on. I think it's fine though. I think, and it soon settles down, but that's just a consequence of having it being a very long journey and having to try to include it in one book. But yeah.
Matt's asked a question that I'm not. Could you expand on what you mean by plans to expand on his early part of the journey, Matt? You're welcome to join us in person or add it in the chat.
Let's extend on the early part of the journey. Oh, I see. I'm wondering whether, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're wondering whether I could sort of write about the early part in more detail because it's moving quite fast.
Go on, Matt, give us a clue.
I mean, if that's the case, then yes. I don't think I would go back to it, to be honest. I've got like all these journals that I brought home with me, lots of other stories that didn't make it into didn't make the final cut. But I don't think, no, I think I need to move on to do other projects now and other books, but so I don't think I'll expand on those, the early part of the trip. But I think there's plenty of detail in there, especially as you get through the book.
There'll be your unpublished works which can come posthumously. Fab. We are going to have to wrap up. But to draw all those strands together, there was a couple of things that really fascinated me, and I think it fascinated you. And you talked about the similarities between geographic language and the language of the body. What were your favourite crossovers between maps, geography, and cartography, and body, and all the ways that we described?
Yeah, I think the metaphors were quite clear, aren't they? You sort of see how rivers sort of divide, and that looks sort of could be blood vessels, and there are lots of ways that you look at maps of the world, like road maps. They look like sort of neuronal networks. So there's loads of, and actually even the early anatomists had made those connections as well. So yeah, I think that, I mean, I suppose my big take home from the journey is that we're all sort of very intimately connected as people and societies are, and I suppose that's true of different parts of the human body as well. But I think that was certainly something that I came home with a strong impression of, that we're all intimately and hopelessly connected, and usually that's a good thing. I think you could argue it's not always, and maybe COVID is one example of a way that we're not always. It's not always a good thing to be so connected, but we'll get out of this together as well, I suppose. The other sort of big take home is that we've all got far more in common, than we sometimes like to admit. I think that can sound quite trite actually to say that, but perhaps it just I also don't think you can say it enough because of the current political climate, certainly after 2016. So yeah, I think those are the sort of the two sort of main impressions I came home with, or two sort of things that I was thinking a lot about when I came home in 2016, which was very this tumultuous year, I suppose. But yeah, in terms of the human body and the world, yeah, there's loads of different parallels you can draw.
And I guess the thing is, they're both structures in the natural world, so of course they would be the same. It's just that we view them through different lenses, so almost disconnect them in our heads. And I guess that's what you're saying about people as well, is that there is so much more that connects us and binds us together. It's just not very fashionable to say that, in that, you know, the one, it's very easy to other people and say, well, they're different from us, and
yeah,
that's what gets the press, isn't it, unfortunately?
Yeah, I think travel itself is very obsessed with otherness. You're looking for other landscapes, other cultures, other food, other, you know, you want to be immersed in difference, I suppose. But as I got through the journey, I became much more interested in the things that people had in common. And again, that was part of what motivated me to explore healthcare, because I think I had two perspectives that shaped that view. I think the first of all, that I was a sort of cyclist, and as a cyclist, you're moving very slowly. You're privy to a lot of everyday life from the saddle of a bicycle, so you start to appreciate that we're all quite similar in that sense. And then as a doctor as well, because, you know, as a doctor, I think you're hearing people's stories very frequently, and and healthcare deals with the sort of raw machinery of our humanity, really, sort of our blood and bones. So that I think being a doctor also fed into this sense that we've all got more in common than we think.
Absolutely. So, right, last question, and it's a question you've been asked before, because Zeph's sister asked it, and she said, "Are you happy?"
Yeah, I think so. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Who's ever happy? But I think at the moment it's been a real. I really enjoyed most of the time writing this book. It's been great, and it's been lovely to balance it with medicine, which is, they're two very different professions. Got the chaos of A&E a few days a week, and then the much calmer world of writing, and so they go together really nicely. And then yeah, I've certainly got more other books I'd love to write, and I think that the next one will also be, you have a stronger medical theme, but it will be taking off in some respects from where this last one left off. And there'll be plenty of stories in there from my time in the NHS, but also other people's stories, and there'll be lots of different interviews and things like that. So I'm excited to get my teeth into that as well.
Brilliant. Well, it's always nice to meet a distinctive voice who's got quite a novel take on things, and I definitely think that's what you've brought to the oeuvre, as it were. So brilliant book. Obviously, you know, not everyone's a subscriber. If you're not a subscriber, then I would just go out and find one, because it's a brilliant book.
Mm-hmm. I've got a few copies. If you're not a subscriber and you would like a copy, you could email me, and I could send you a signed copy. That's no problem. I think I've got 2 hardbacks left though, so not many, but yeah.
Fab. Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Well, I guess all we can say is good luck with your night in A&E. Yeah.
It's going to be carnage. I can tell you that.
I'll let everyone else know. There's bound to be some good stories. But yeah, thank you. So thank you for the book. Thank you for the travels, and thank you for bringing a wonderful. You're so well balanced, I think, with that reflection and the full on action. It all just works beautifully. So Thank you so much. You're like a living yin yang.
Thanks for having me.
It's been our pleasure, Stephen. Thank you very much. Everyone, if you want to pop your cameras back on, and we'll do that usual say goodbye thing. Don't feel that you need you have to if you don't want to. Right. See you all later. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for forsaking the football. I'm sure you're as unbothered about it as I am. So there we go. Brilliant. Thanks, Stephen. Have a good night. Bye, everyone. Thank you.